I'm going to discuss a left-libertarian approach to politics, and there should be time for everyone to ask questions at the end and participate. It's a left-libertarian approach, certainly not the only one. There are actually a number of definitions of left-libertarian that could be used. I tend to look at it, at least right now, as follows, and that is to, as much as possible, disperse power in political, economic, and social relations among all individuals who respect the liberties of others, and to displace authoritarian relations with consensual relations rooted in mutual cooperation. So what does that mean? Political power is the power of coercion. Having unequal political power means being able to coerce others because you outrank them. Equalizing political power means that rules are agreed upon, interpreted, and enforced by people regarded as equals. Economic power is the power to influence others through wealth. Just about everybody has some amount of economic power because just about everybody can create wealth by using mind and body. However, when some have much more than others, they may have the ability to constrict the choices that others can make. This does not mean that wealth can or should be made equal. And when people do different things, makes sense, they would get different stuff. When there's ample opportunity to pursue other alternatives, wealth loses its power to dominate. Social power is exercised through custom, tradition, or social expectation. Respect, and the way that respect works, is rooted in social expectations, and liberty is best assured by a culture that respects the freedom for individuals to develop rather than a culture that emphasizes rank and deference to those who outrank you. Almost every time that any of these powers are vastly unequal, it is because they are all unequal. Having a large share of one means having the ability to trade for the others with the other powers in society. Equality in power enables individuals to have their best chance of flourishing. Society is best when individuals are at their best, and individuals do better in a better social environment. Autonomy does not necessarily mean relying on nobody, but instead having the ability to effectively choose who to rely on. Speaking broadly, but specifically enough to show orientation, a left-libertarian approach is libertarian in that it makes a priority of maximum individual liberty, equal liberty for all. It is also mutual or cooperative, for lack of some other word that maybe will work better, if you can come up with one, and that it emphasizes voluntary organizations for the common benefit of participants. This does imply moving in an anarchist direction. Anarchism is not merely a utopian dream where nobody is ever harmed, but can refer to a state of affairs where no rulership is generally considered to be legitimate power. One does not have to fall under the label left-libertarian to be an anarchist, or have to be an anarchist to be a left-libertarian, but there are general tendencies in common. So, if there was hypothetically a left-libertarian platform, what might it look like? Why don't we consider 7 points for now? 1, withdrawal of the military empire and a rollback of the internal security state apparatus. 2, break up the power of political and economic elites by highlighting and disrupting their connections and by creating and expanding grassroots economic power. Points 1 and 2 will immensely benefit the economy and liberty of the average person under American government power. 3, end the drug war, eliminate police brutality, and bring more accountability to police. The government police force is the enforcement arm of the authoritarian state. It is an organization that enforces its own monopoly and responds to political power. While this inherent function will encourage bad behavior, within the context of an existing government police force, things can be made better in the interim by reassigning the political priorities that police forces respond to, and by introducing more accountability and community control into police forces. Grassroots efforts like Cop Watch and Cop Block are essential to holding the police forces in check. 4, roll back draconian anti-migrant policies, and seek to eliminate power imbalances based on differences of ethnicity, gender, or sexual orientation. Points 3 and 4 will drastically cut the prison industrial complex and its modern slavery economics. Point 5, establish more libertarian mutual education. The authoritarianism that children are subject to by the time they first salute the flag until the time they are permitted to enlist and vote is of critical importance. Addressing this issue should take priority over issues of social cost or the welfare of school staff. Regionally divided government education also is a major contributor to economic segregation and wasteful municipal redundancy. Left libertarians should seek to break the power of the schooling establishment and engage in serious efforts to create education alternatives that invite participation. Point 6, protection of the environment in accord with human needs. A healthier human environment, including the urban environment, leads to healthier people and healthier relations. Wild places are important for human development. But today, rather than restrict pollution by treating it as an injury to persons or possessions, the costs of pollution tend to be shifted to the least powerful. And 7, popular access to small arms. While the organization of heavy weapons and the means to restrict weapons of mass destruction should be considered further, combat rifles and pistols should be generally available in order to hinder the ability of certain parties to monopolize power by monopolizing arms. With the above platform for action in mind, some things should be considered. It could be argued that these points are more important than an emphasis on ending the state, since without the existence of broad libertarian and mutualist understanding and the power to challenge authority, the ending of the state would only see the rise of new forms of authority rooted in social and economic power and won through political maneuvering. And while some of these points would have to be pursued outside of the system, in theory, a country could exist where all these points are satisfied, but there is still a government. However, just because these planks theoretically could be accomplished under the existence of a state does not mean that the state should not be eliminated. The state is authoritarian and will exert authority. It is a dangerous establishment of legitimated authority that would always have to be kept in check. It is the primary tool that elites use to rule and to privilege others according to how much they help them keep in power. The 7 points, then, would be best pursued within the end goal of eliminating the state, but in cooperation with people who wish to implement these points but do not necessarily want to end the state. By making the state less valuable, we make it less powerful and therefore more vulnerable. Doing so will present opportunities to demonstrate libertarian principles in action. But movement toward liberty will be opposed by powerful enemies. Putting the state on the defensive, possibly threatening even the basis of its existence by threatening the ideology of its existence, will be necessary to win. The basis of left libertarian political action is movement from below, from outside the political system, toward a free and just society. Consensual cooperative organization and networking provide the foundation for a future free society. Libertarian social organization 1 should provide libertarian structure to fall back on if current authorities fail, which would make it more difficult for other authorities to move in. 2, it should incentivize behavior, going beyond leading by example by setting expectations and creating incentives. When there are concrete benefits to participating in libertarian action, then more people will participate in them and abide by the included social norms. It might be helpful to think of human organization as a series of networks, some more or less formal than others, and some more or less libertarian than others. By establishing formal or informal networks to meet needs outside of authorities and elites, left libertarians will eliminate the real and perceived need for authorities and elites. These networks could operate on varying degrees of ideological commitment. They should never be thought of as deceptive front organizations to enlist useful idiots, but rather as means to work together on shared values while developing values further. Cooperative action then establishes a basis for further cooperative action while taking over the functions currently used by authorities. There are a number of examples of people with various political identities using mutual aid or cooperative networks. Within the Arab Spring uprisings, the Greek anti-authoritarians, and the Occupy gatherings, people have found it both expedient and liberating to help meet each other's needs outside of establishment means. Friendly societies have in earlier times helped participants find jobs, resources in hard times, or pooled medical expenses. Activist centers make it easier for people with shared values to participate in improving the world. And organizations like Food Not Bombs or Free Aid are more compassionate and provide more personalized care than bureaucratic structures tend to be able to do. To develop these alternative networks to their fullest potential while discussing and demonstrating libertarian paths is a key component of liberation. I want to take a moment to talk about power vacuums. The phrase power vacuum might seem like it's just something statists made up to scare people into submission, but I think it's actually a useful concept to think about. A power vacuum would imply that nobody has power, and of course nature abhors a vacuum. But what is power other than the ability to influence and affect changes possibly concerning the behavior of others? Oppression is not necessarily the existence of power, but results from power imbalances or conflicts over power. When the authority is amass power, they take it from individuals and from communities, leaving a power vacuum over the common person's life. But empowered people with libertarian ethics are better able to resist the impositions of others. So the left-libertarian goal is not really to eliminate power, but to disperse power among all individuals who respect the liberty of others. When power is dispersed, the state of affairs is not really a power vacuum. It's widespread empowerment. The left-libertarian project, then, could be seen as a massive project of ethical, individual empowerment. Maybe not massive right now, but, the ideal. As a matter of fact, libertarian-minded movements have seen some success in filling a power vacuum with the power of people mobilized by ideology and good organization, at least until being defeated by overwhelming statist attacks and deceptions. The Paris Commune and the anarchist movements in Ukraine, Spain, and Xinjiang province can be thought of using this framework. But if we talk about movement from below, we should think about how action from above can affect a libertarian transition. We certainly don't want to do for the word libertarian what Lenin did for the word communist. The Soviet Union does remain an excellent example of an activist state directing the revolution from above that supposedly would eventually result in a withering away of the state and an end to exploitation. Change should primarily be driven and established from below. Theoretically, though, the interim towards a libertarian or more strictly anarchist society could benefit from a government of transition adjudicating disputes between political bodies and helping to ensure peaceful relations with outside powers. It does seem like it would be a difficult task to ensure peace with other states, or just states when you're not a state, especially when a major country with a huge military, including nuclear weapons, is seen as collapsing into anarchy. B, international finance worries about getting paid. C, a power vacuum is seen that is ripe for exploitation, which of course would be mitigated by grassroots free association, empowering individuals, as previously discussed. And D, anarchists and revolutionaries are undermining foreign states. Foreign politicians might be on the lookout then for someone who looks like he has some clout and is able to do business. Maybe people who are into the politician thing could then have a positive role, talking to the outside, placating nationalist tendencies. Maybe such person could even be a representative of consensually based confederated communities or organizations of polycentric law. There's a problem here, though. We're talking about structures and institutions. What about people and personalities? Who is actually in the dismantling state or the transition state? Who are they? What motivates them? How do they actually give up power? They probably worked hard to get into position to affect change from the top, and they might be convinced that they're the best people for the job. Are they seeking to direct loot into their own pockets? This is something we often see in government and in transitionary stages. And are they cutting deals to sell out the revolution? Another thing that is seen and accused a lot. Politicians, however, will be influenced by culture and by the ways in which respect and reputation can be improved within the prevailing cultural context. This goes back to incentives. People who might otherwise become politicians clutching at every string of power might instead seek to gain influence through persuasion, not coercion, and they might find that they are more persuasive when they're viewed as one of the good guys. Such a cultural shift, of course, is best created outside of the political system. What about constitutionalist politicians? In the short term, they can be helpful at creating an atmosphere more conducive to positive changes, opening up space for activists and reducing the harm done by government in foreign and domestic affairs. In the long term, it is better to acknowledge the failures inherent in the system and move forward from this reality with an eye toward developing the better traditions. But if everyone is going to sign on as a partisan of a particular political campaign, then that focuses everyone at one single point that's failure could destroy the movement and the credibility of the ideas that it professes. And this is a point that is likely to bring many failures, as affecting change on the initiative of the top of the political system means working through politicians and bureaucrats at many levels and entrenched interests. On the one hand, the greater success of politicians who use libertarian talking points can make other politicians start to pander in this direction, maybe throwing a few bones here and there. But what part of the platform will they actually listen to? Will they listen to the whole principle? Will they just take one fragment of it? And what if they just co-opt the good rhetoric? And what if good intentions from the top even get twisted into harmful policies when they finally reach the ground? Then the credibility of the initiator and his ideas is stained, both in order to create cultural expectation for those in power, then when it is time to disperse power, and in order to ensure a healthy counter to whatever politician comes into power. It is essential to have organization from below. So to conclude, apparently quickly, I guess, fairly quickly, if it's not possible to have a free society today, let's make it a freer society today and make the foundations for a free society soon. This is a path that requires flexibility, but it also requires an informed skepticism toward political sales pitches. A left-libertarian approach might or might not be explicitly anarchist, but it shares principles with anarchism and moves in that direction. A left-libertarian approach is to build from the bottom up to displace the rule of political and economic elites and social authoritarians. It is for a society of free, autonomous, and flourishing individuals and the communities they create together. That's it. Okay, I did hope to leave time for discussion, and it looks like I might have been overly successful at that. But
way over today.
What any thoughts? Yes.
I'd like to, well, first I was just wondering if you could introduce yourself so you get a little bit of context
Oh.
of who you are.
Okay, I thought I needed no introduction now. I'm Darian Worden. I write for Center for a Stateless Society at c4ss.org. I contribute to Alliance Journal a lot. There's some of those out there. Generally affiliated with the Alliance of the Libertarian Left, staffing a table partly over in Liberty Forum. Well, I'm not standing right here. And I also do, not as much anymore, but a podcast called Thinking Liberty. So I've been into libertarian ideas and been in the libertarian movement for a while. Not in New Hampshire, I'm down in New Jersey. And I generally find the left libertarian approach to be something that fits my mindset and my focus more. So.
Haven't you also written a book?
I have. I wrote a novella called Bring a Gun to School Day about how a major school shooting affects a teenager's life and the authorities who are trying to build up some more power and more bureaucracy for themselves. So I do have some of those if you want to talk to me later.
Okay. Good.
Yes.
What would you, for people who aren't familiar with left libertarianism, who would you recommend for thinkers and essays and
well, obviously myself.
Duh. Clearly.
No, I really like Roderick Long. His writings are very good, especially the essay "Equality: The Unknown Ideal."
That's a good one.
I think it's very good in getting to the root of looking at inequality in authority, is how he puts it. So no one has authority over each other. You're not equal under the law, you're equal with the law.
Right.
So that's a good one. Kevin Carson, especially on the kind of ground up economic alternatives is really good. Charles Johnson, Radgeek, radgeek.com, like him a lot. So Alliance Journal is very good. Also, for just getting kind of, especially if you're more into the the general market libertarian zone, I think Samuel Konkin, the New Libertarian Manifesto, it's a very good framework for kind of considering problems in that context. So, and of course there are others who are good too. But yes.
I just had a question that I think this is an issue that for a lot of left libertarians kind of comes up, but so the state often acts as a mediator between, say, capital and labor, in a variety of ways. And so in terms of like the sort of thinking about strategy for implementing these things, oftentimes you'll see, attacks on one side's interests or the other in the state. Do you think that left libertarians, I know Carson has played around with this idea, but should think, maybe dismantling state support for capital before state support for labor, or do you think it's sort of they're morally equivalent? You just take whatever tax you should get. What are your thoughts on that debate?
I think, to me personally, I would say look at the effects of what your action is going to be. I wouldn't say on principle capital before labor or anything like that. But generally, I wouldn't want to cut out something like from underneath people. So, this social safety net is a net. It entraps people. But, for people who are relying on that, I'd rather cut the net above them than the net below them, if you know what I mean. Cut the restrictions that are keeping them from being independent before cutting, the subsidies that they're dependent on. As for the state mediating between capital and labor, I think a big problem is that the state is mediating and it's trying to, not that, we have to be this endless class war until one's dead. But what I mean is that in the state context, it's a power game. So you get union bosses as well as capitalist bosses. And then, the average person is just kind of, you have to serve one or the other, which isn't to say that unions as they exist today or businesses as they exist today are completely useless and we shouldn't have anything to do with either of them. But it's a problem when they get into entrenched power. So just building a more grassroots approach outside of that is a way to go. Yes, Jack.
I always refer to what he asked as the sequence question, like what would you go for first? And I think it's a good point, or a good question for us to address, because, for example, some, I would say, right libertarians, when they would address something like the Bush tax cut, would say, well, it's good, we should accept it because we should accept any cut in taxes, when the end result is to, like, increase the imbalance, you know, if it's a tax cut for the wealthy only and an increase net, you know, on balance for the lower and middle classes, I think it actually hurts freedom rather than helps it. But
yeah, I think you see this a lot. A politician will be like, look, I cut these taxes, but it'll be, you know, taxes on people with a certain amount of wealth, which, you know, I don't like taxes either. But then what they'll do is they'll pay for it by, because, you know, you can't just cut the state. I mean, come on. They'll pay for it by kind of taking back these refunds for people on low income or something like that. So for like a tax for people on fixed income seniors, their taxes actually go up, but you see it at the top. And I guess what I said is not quite correct. Politicians do cut state services, but they're still acting as a state when they do that. So they're cutting through the bureaucracy. The bureaucracy's implementing the cuts. So the bureaucrats aren't cutting themselves. They're passing it on to somewhere else. So you'll see people being forced into schools, people being forced to pay for something, but they're just getting less in return. So this cut in services, this cut to the schools, you know, kids are still being forced into there. Now they're just even worse confinement conditions. So.
Yeah, and the other way is if they cut taxes, it could just come out of inflation and debt,
right?
Which really gets passed on to society at large, which is like us. You know,
yeah,
so.
I think cut taxes from the bottom up and welfare from the top down is the slogan.
Yeah,
there you go.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
I think Nick, did you have your hand first?
Yeah, I was just gonna say the Pinkertons are hire if you want to, you know, if you want to use them for some labor capital mediation. I hear they're really good at it.
Okay, all right. That's glad you have they have your endorsement. Go ahead.
Neither one of those opposites really addressed, though. For instance, here locally, the town just decided they hadn't even addressed. We had an alderman here last night. Who's also a state rep and a free stater, and it was interesting because they hired another 9 firemen, and they didn't even have the number. They didn't ask how much it was going to cost. They didn't figure in who was going to be retiring this year. They didn't even have the numbers, but they just went and hired 9 new people. And the fact of the matter is, at the end of the day, they're not going to have the money to pay for these people. I mean, we already have 200 firemen in town. We don't need another 9. I mean, it's crazy. So that doesn't really fit into, you know, either one of those categories. It's like if you talk to not left libertarians but the left in general, they seem to be of the mindset that anyone who belongs to a union is the working class. And you're like, no, the working class is not making $70,000 a year sitting on their ass playing video games and collecting, you know, double hours towards their retirement. That's not middle class. That's not what the rest of us are doing.
Right. So I think that's a very good point that is often lost in the rhetoric. Like who is actually the working class, who is actually privileged, I think. And okay, so your union, you know, garbage collector, he's probably not as big a threat to your liberty as the multimillionaire who's got his lobbyists in and out of the state house. But I think it's important to think about this privilege, this access. I mean, I would wonder, all right, whose idea was it to hire these extra firefighters? What's in it for them? Is one of them a relative? Because I think local government, a lot of times you see that corruption or who's on the in crowd. They do favors for other people, which interesting in a lot of parts of the world. That's not even culturally considered wrong. It's okay, you know, these are your people. You have this position. You help them out. So as I guess your question is, just, or was it more of a comment that this doesn't really fit into the left-right?
It doesn't fit into the labor versus capital, or do you cut from the top or the bottom, because they're really neither. I mean, it's kind of like they're really somewhere in between the parasitic class, and they do provide a service, but it's a very overpriced service for the value that people are getting.
Yeah, and I think the municipal government model is a big thing, because obviously the municipal government has a regional monopoly. You know, they can call in help from other municipalities. And, you know, obviously because they're supported by taxes, it's really hard to compete against them, because then people actually, you know, they have to pay for the other service anyway. So that's, I think that is a good point, that it doesn't really fit into the bottom down or top up. I guess really the way to look at it is, you know, all right, what is needed here? Is there a way to have this outside of the system? Why are we hiring all these people? Things like that. So I guess just a typical, or not a typical, but a more general, you know, less government approach there. Yes.
I actually think that that's a statist technique or a tactic. In other words, their goal is to increase the power of the state. Now what's going to happen is they create downstream a budget crisis. So they don't even, the reason they don't even think about what it is because they just want there to be a budget crisis, because then they have to raise taxes, because they have to meet their budget every year. They can't print their own money in the city, so they have to collect it from everybody else. I mean, so then downstream, I think the question for us is, when the crisis happens, where they're talking about the budget, if we can, you know, opportunistically educate at that point. You know, all along we want to make it so that we don't need fire by having good sprinkler systems or fire extinguishers or whatever, so that we can actually demonstrate that wasn't needed. It's already too late on this one, you know, the horse is out of the barn, so. But I think it's a technique to create a crisis down the road, which they have to solve with statist means.
I think that there probably is something to that. You know, I'm sure there's a lot of varied motivations. Everyone has conflicting motivations at some point. That's probably something that is there for a lot of them. And I think, you know, it's kind of hard to do this, obviously. You know, easier said than done. But to just have some kind of alternative to point to, like, okay, look how badly government's managing not their money, but your money, and managing to take care of you when they say that they will. You know, that they don't give you a choice even. It's like, you know, you're our people, and this is how they treat you. So to have something that's on a more mutual cooperative basis, and you know, if you treat others decently, we'll treat you decently. That kind of thing. Obviously, easier said than done. Than to have these kind of varying ideological networks out there. So.
I was going to say too, I just want to point out too, like cutting from the top or the bottom, or favoring, or not that, but really favoring capital or labor. I don't know if it really matters if the people that win that battle, that particular cut or however it's done, if they become like loyal to whoever did it, they just become, that's like, partisan politics. They just will stick with that person. They did that favor for me, and I'm going to stay with them. They don't. And I think having to overcome that issue, for everyone to overcome that issue and not do that, that's the real hard part. Because it doesn't really matter, I don't think, if you cut capital or labor on the labor side, if no one realizes it's just a game to them, and my guy won, my guy did this for me, and if they keep that mentality forever, it doesn't matter. It's a zero-sum gain out of the whole thing.
That's a very good point about sorry, were you done?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, it's about loyalty. Very good point. And I think this goes back to the fact that we might want to say otherwise, but the state does provide something to people. It's totally illegitimate means, and it's totally exploitative, and it's to keep people in power that they give out a little. But your mob boss, he provides a service, and he gets loyalty. And I think this is how a lot of politicians are, and even the political system. That hey, what I have is dependent on this, and this. So I want this, and this to stay good. So that's why I think kind of breaking that dependency, and that's where the counter-economic idea is really good, because economics, it doesn't determine everything, but when people have an interest in something financially, and what side their bread is buttered on, and that matters. And kind of bringing people out of that, where they're not dependent on these elites and authoritarians. I say elites, but it could be your local elite, your comparatively, the boss, the local boss who runs things is technically an elite. So just getting people away from that, I think that's a very good point, that there's loyalty. And I don't want to say go by the same means and make people loyal to you, but kind of so there's something else out there.
There's also a lot of background work to do on a lot of these changes that we want to see in the world. If we want bottom-up changes to society, we got to influence the people at the bottom, not influence the people at the top, which is why left libertarians aren't much for politics, because we don't think there's much use in it. And so if we're going to cut labor or cut capital, I do think it's meaningful, but it's only meaningful if we take into account what he just said about that people have to realize it's not me versus you, and we can't really do it through status means, because if we do it through status means, it increases the chance that it could just become a sort of partisan sort of thing. They did me a favor, so I should do them a favor. I'm loyal to the party, and I must do what the party says. So I think it's important to focus on the bottom, and I think the capital-labor divide is there, but it could be overstated, it could not, I'm not sure.
Well, to be sure, someone who does have your employment in his hands, that you're relying on him, that if you lose this job, you don't know if you're going to be able to get another, you don't know if you're going to be able to pay the mortgage on your house, pay your rent, pay for food, pay your medical expenses. This person has power over you. I mean, if they fire you, it's not that easy to get a new job, especially, this obviously is a cultural thing, but especially if you're used to a certain standard of living, even if it's not even that high of a standard of living, but just where you have, basic access things. And so there is definitely a capital-labor power imbalance.
Yeah.
That being said, the solution is kind of to make people able, not necessarily not dependent on anybody, self-reliant, but able to choose where they're relying on.
Yeah.
Able to choose, as long as there's sufficient competition, where losing your job means you get another, as long as you're not a jerk and you're not recognized as someone who's just terrible to work with. Where a situation where that, then people have options. Then anyone who's hiring you and you agree is because they're giving you something that's good that you're not getting elsewhere. I mean, obviously, whatever choice you make is because you see that as the best choice. That doesn't mean that it's a good choice. So, as for top-down or bottom-up political action, I think really you have to build up a base. That doesn't mean that there's nothing that can be done inside the system that's not, going to make it better or worse, but really the focus has to be on society and what's outside. Did you have a comment?
I was just going to say that it's not that much of an imbalance in that if you're a valuable employee, you have a lot of strength too. I mean, you could quit and walk out at a critical time, and the whole business could sink.
Right.
And I mean, that was kind of the idea behind unions. But if you make yourself valuable, sure, he can hire someone else, but he can't hire you.
Right. So that's another part of eliminating power imbalances, that you make workers more valuable. Is the kind of thing. I mean, it's just a basic supply and demand thing. Like you're saying, if you quit and they have no one to replace you, then you're in demand. So it's not control by force. It's control, well, not even control, but just influence, because you're more in demand. So there's going to be a higher price paid for you. Okay, we're good? All right. Thank you very much. Very good discussion.